Thing 1, 2, 3. How do I do this? Cool. I'm testing out a vertical canvas. What's up? Boo! Bow! Have to show the guns, man. I'm making gains at the gym, guys. I'm very happy with how I look, but my gut is still pretty fat, though. Well, getting set up, guys. We're gonna be reading part 2 of Prison Nation. The Warehousing of America's Poor by Tara Haravel and Paul Wright. So we did part 1. We're going to do part 2 soon, okay? So let me put my live now links out. And this is my first stream on Instagram Live, guys. So start the stream. Movie reviews and gaming. Alright, so posting live now on X, and I'm going to post live now on Blue Sky. To start the evening. Some film reviews. All right, sweet. How do I look on the vertical? Does the vertical look? Hello. Test. Okay, multi-stream. All right, so let's I think the Instagram live's going pretty good. Whew. So, how's everybody doing? Nervous as always. I'm always nervous when I'm about to stream. So, today I'm drinking I'm trying a new live organic soda. I'm not a big fan of these, like the ones that have plant fiber in them, but I'm trying a new brand, seeing how they do. So, let me see. How does it show if you're live on the freaking web, though? Well, I give up. Fuck it. All right, last things last. Test. Hello. All right, guys, welcome to the stream. I'm Game.Film, and I like to play games, review movies, but I also like to read books on stream. And I'm anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist. I like talking about how capitalism is screwing us, the U.S. government is corrupt and horrible, and I like bringing things like that to light. And I've been talking about mass incarceration lately. In part 1, we learned how prosecutors have the upper hand on the defendants, how they can withhold evidence, and how they have the police on their side. You know, the police want to lock everybody up, so they're definitely going to side with the prosecutor. So we learned that in our first article. In the introduction, we also read that the prison boom has always been increasing since the 60s. It exploded in the 80s when corporate profits were low. They needed a new kind of currency, right? And they turned to people, prisoners, as currency. Private prisons exploded. Regular prisons exploded as well. So um, there's dozens of articles. This is kind of like a collection of dozens of articles from magazines. Um, the past 20, 25 years or so. When you read one, yeah. And we're going to start part 2. So, all right, let's see where the next. So you see I got a bunch of bookmarks here. So I'm not reading every page of this book. It's kind of a select reading, you know? So, all right, so we're on page 30. I hope my audio is good because I don't even know. All right, guys, let's start part 2 of Prison Nation, the warehousing of America's poor. Page 30. This one is titled Colorblind by Paul Street. This article was originally published in Dissent, summer 2001. Excuse me. Let's get ready here. Prisons and the New American Racism by Paul Street. Prison Dreams. Defined simply as overt public bigotry, racism in the United States has fallen to an all-time low. Understood in socioeconomic, political, and institutional terms, however, American racism is as alive as ever. More than 30 years after the heroic victories of the civil rights movement, Stanley Aronowitz notes, quote, "The stigma of race remains the unmeltable condition of the black social and economic situation," close quote. That condition's seemingly insoluble persistence is seen in an inequitably funded educational system that just happens to provide poor instruction for blacks and whites, an electoral system whose voting irregularities and domination by big money just happens to disproportionately disenfranchise blacks in job, housing, healthcare, and financial labor markets that just happen to especially disadvantage and segregate African Americans. It is evident in a political economy whose tendency toward sharp inequality just happens to especially impoverish and divide black communities. And it is evident in the glaring injustices of the U.S. prison system. Consider a recent Chicago Tribune article that appeared well off the front page, under the title, "Towns Put Dreams in Prisons." In downstate Hooperston, Illinois, there is talk of the mothballed canneries that once made this a boom town, and whether any of that bustling spirit might return if the Illinois Department of Corrections comes to town. Seeking jobs and economic growth, Hoopeston's leaders are negotiating with state officials for the right to host a shiny new maximum security correctional facility. You don't like to think about incarceration, Hoopeston's mayor is quoted as saying, but this is an opportunity for Hoopeston. We've been plagued by plant closings. The mayor's judgment is seconded in the Tribune's account of the considerable benefits, including dramatically increased tax revenues that flowed to Ena, Illinois, after it signed up to become a prison town a few years ago. Two things are missing from this story. The first absence is an appropriate sense of horror at the spectacle of a society in which local officials are reduced to lobbying for prisons as their best chance for economic growth. Okay, so that goes. Where are we? All right, let me start that paragraph. Two things are missing from this story. The first absence is an appropriate sense of horror at the spectacle of a society in which local officials are reduced to lobbying for prisons as their best chance for economic growth. The second absence concerns the matter of race. Nowhere could the reporter or his informants, insofar as they are fully and accurately recorded, bring themselves to mention either the predominantly white composition of the keepers or the predominantly black composition of the kept in the prisons towns that increasingly look to the mass incarceration boom as the solution to their economic problems. As everyone knows, but few like to discuss, the mostly white residents of those towns are building their economic dreams on the transport and lockdown of unfree African Americans from impoverished inner city neighborhoods in places like Chicago, Rockford, East St. Louis, and Rock Island. The new racism. This second absence is consistent with the politically correct rules of the new racism that plagues the United States at the millennium's turn. There is a widespread belief among whites, deeply and ironically reinforced by the demise of open, public racial prejudice, that African Americans now enjoy equal and colorblind opportunity. As white America sees it, write Barbara Dix Brown and Leonard Steinhorn in their sobering By the Color of Their Skin, The Illusion of Integration in the Reality of Race, year 2000. Quote, every effort has been made to welcome blacks into the American mainstream, and now they are on their own. We got the message, we made the corrections, get on with it, close quote. Going downstate. Nowhere, perhaps, is the persistence and even resurgence of racism more evident than in America's burgeoning correctional system. At the millennium's turn, blacks are 12.3% of the U.S. population, but they comprise fully half of the roughly 2 million Americans currently behind bars. On any given day, 30% of African American males aged 20 to 29 are under correctional supervision, either in jail or prison or on probation or parole. And according to a chilling statistical model used by the Bureau of Justice Statistics, a young black man aged 16 and 96 faces a 29% chance of spending time in prison during his life. The corresponding statistic for white men in the same age group is 4%. The United States' remarkable number and percentage of persons locked up by the state or otherwise under the watchful eye of criminal justice authorities, far beyond those of the rest of the industrialized world, is black to an extraordinary degree. This harsh reality gives rise to extreme racial dichotomies. Take, for example, the different meanings of the phrase going downstate for use of different skin colors in the Chicago metropolitan area. For many white teens, those words evoke the image of a trip with mom and dad to begin academic careers at the prestigious University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana or at one of the state's many other public universities. But for younger Chicago area blacks, especially males, just 6% of the state's prisoners are female, going downstate more likely connotes a trip under armed guard to begin prison careers at one of the state's numerous maximum or medium security prisons. Indeed, Illinois has 115,746 more persons enrolled in its four-year public universities than its prisons. When it comes to blacks, however, it has 10,000 more prisoners. For every African American enrolled in those universities, 2.5 blacks are in prison or on parole in Illinois. Similar differences of meaning can be found in other states with significant black populations. In New York, where the relevant phrase is going upstate, the Justice Policy Institute reports that in the 1990s, more blacks entered prison just for drug offenses than graduated from the state's massive university system with undergraduate, master's, and doctoral degrees combined. In some inner city neighborhoods, researchers and advocates report a preponderant majority of black males now possess criminal records. Criminologists Dina Rose and Todd Clear have found black neighborhoods in Tallahassee where every resident can identify at least one friend or relative who has been incarcerated. In many predominantly black urban communities across the country, it appears incarceration is so widespread and commonplace that it has become what the United States Bureau of Justice Statistics Director Jan Chaikin recently called almost a normative life experience. Children there are growing up with the sense that it is standard for older brothers, uncles, fathers, cousins, and perhaps someday themselves to be locked up by the state. Labor market disenfranchisement. Researchers and advocates tracking the impact of mass incarceration find devastating consequences in high poverty black communities. The most well known is the widespread political disenfranchisement of felons and ex felons. The economic effects are equally significant. African Americans are disproportionately and often deeply disenfranchised in competitive job markets by low skills, poor schools, weakened family structures, racial discrimination in hiring and promotion, and geographic isolation from the leading sectors of job growth. When prison and felony records are thrown into that mixture, the results are often disastrous. It is not uncommon to hear academic researchers and service providers cite unemployment rates as high as 50% for people with records. One study, based in California during the early 1990s, found that just 21% of that state's parolees were working full time. In a detailed study, Karen Needles found that less than 40% of 1,176 men released from Georgia's prison system in 1976 had any officially recorded earnings in each year from 1983 to 1991. For those with earnings, average annual wages were exceedingly low and differed significantly by race. White former prisoners averaged $7,880 per year, and blacks made just $4,762. One second, please. I just need to. Sorry, I need to text this. Okay, so where were we? All right, here we were. Sorry about that. In the most widely cited study in the growing literature on the labor market consequences of racially disparate criminal justice policies, distinguished Harvard economist Richard Freeman used data from the National Longitudinal Survey of Youth, NLSY, limiting his sample to out-of-school men and controlling for numerous variables, drug usage, education, region, and age, that might bias upward the link between criminal records and weak labor market attachment. Freeman found that those who had been in jail or on probation in 1980 had a 19% higher chance of being unemployed in 1988 than those with no involvement in the criminal justice system. He also found that prison records reduced the amount of time employed after release by 25 to 30%. More recently, Princeton sociologist Bruce Western has mined NLSY data to show that incarceration has large and enduring effects on job prospects of ex-convicts. He finds that the negative labor market effects of youth incarceration can last for more than a decade, and that adult incarceration reduces paid employment by 5 to 10 weeks annually. Since incarceration rates are especially high among those with the least power in the labor market, young and unskilled minority men, the U.S. justice system exacerbates inequality. This research is consistent with numerous experimental studies suggesting that the employment prospects of job applicants with criminal records are far worse than the chances of persons who have never been convicted or imprisoned. It is consistent also with evidence from labor market intermediaries dealing with ex-offenders. Project Strive, a renowned city job replacement program that mainly serves younger minority males in inner city Chicago, reports that it placed 37 of 50 ex-offenders in jobs last year, leaving a 26% unemployment rate even for people who went through an especially successful program. The Center for Employment Opportunity in New York City is another successful program. Focused specifically on ex-offenders, it fails to place nearly a third of its clients. Another standard bearer in the field, Project Rio of the Texas Workforce Commission, claims to process 15,000 prisoners a year. After 1 year, just over two-thirds of parolees who go through Project Rio hold jobs. More telling, since most ex-offenders are thrown into the labor market without the benefit of a special transitional employment program, just 36% of a group of Texas parolees who did not enroll in Project Rio had a job 1 year after their release. And even when paroled inmates are able to find jobs, the New York Times reported last fall, they earn only half as much as people of the same social and economic background who have not been incarcerated. The obstacles to ex-offender employment include the simple refusal of many employers even to consider hiring an ex-con. Employers routinely check for criminal backgrounds in numerous sectors, including banking, security, financial services, law, education, and healthcare. But for many jobs, employer attitudes are irrelevant. State codes place steep barriers to the hiring of ex-offenders in numerous government and other occupations. At the same time, Western notes, quote, the increasingly violent and overcrowded state of prisons and jails is likely to reproduce certain attitudes, mannerisms, and behavioral practices that, on the inside, function to enhance survival but are not compatible with success in the conventional job market, close quote. The alternately aggressive and sullen posture that prevails behind bars is deadly in a job market where entry-level occupations increasingly demand soft skills related to selling and customer service. In this, as in countless other ways, the prisoner may be removed, or at least temporarily, from prison. But prison lives on within the ex-offender, limiting his freedom on the outside. Savage ironies. The situation arising from mass black incarceration is fraught with self-fulfilling policy ironies. At the very moment that American public discourse in racial matters has become officially inclusive, the United States is filling its expanding number of cell blocks with an ever-rising sea of black people, monitored by predominantly white overseers. Echoes of slavery haunt the new incarceration state, reminding us of unresolved historical issues in the United States of amnesia. Mass incarceration is just as ironically juxtaposed to welfare reform. At the same moment that the broader political and policy-making community is replacing taxpayer-financed welfare dependency with workforce attachment and free market discipline, leading supposedly to self-sufficiency in two-parent family stability among the urban underclass. Criminal justice policies are pushing hundreds of thousands of already disadvantaged and impoverished underclass blacks further from minimally remunerative engagement with the labor market. It does this by warehousing them in expensive, publicly financed, sex-segregated holding pens where rehabilitation has been discredited and authoritarian incapacitation is the rule. Droves of alienated men are removed from contact with children, parents, spouses, and lovers, contributing to the chronic shortage of suitable male marriage partners and resident fathers in the black community. Black humor on Chicago's South Side quips that the only thing prison cures is heterosexuality. A connection probably exists between rampant sexual assault and sexual segregation behind prison bars, and the disturbing fact that AIDS is now the leading cause of death among blacks between the ages of 25 and 44. Incarceration deepens a job skill deficit that is a leading factor explaining criminal behavior among disadvantaged people in the first place. Crime rates are inversely related, Richard B. Freeman and Jeffrey Fagan have shown, to expected legal wages, particularly among young males with limited job skills or prospects. The war on drugs that contributes so strongly to minority incarceration also inflates the price of underground substances, combining with ex offenders' shortage of marketable skills in the legal economy to create irresistible incentives for the sort of income generating conduct that leads back to prison. The lost potential earnings, savings, consumer demand, and human and social capital that result from mass incarceration cost black communities untold millions of dollars in potential economic development, worsening an inner city political economy already crippled by decades of capital flight and deindustrialization. The dazed and embittered graduates of the prison industrial complex are released back into a small number of predominantly black and high poverty zip codes and census tracts, deepening the concentration of poverty, crime, and despair that is the hallmark of modern American hyper segregation by race and class. Meanwhile, prisoners' deletion from the official U.S. unemployment statistics contributes to excessively rosy perceptions of American socioeconomic performance that worsen the political climate for minorities. Bruce Western has shown that factoring incarceration into unemployment rates challenges the conventional American notion that the United States' unregulated labor markets have been outperforming Europe's supposedly hyper-regulated employment system. Far from taking a laissez-faire approach, the U.S. state has made a large and coercive intervention into the labor market through the expansion of the legal system. An American employment rate, adjusted for imprisonment, would rise by 2 points, bringing the U.S. ratio much closer to that of European nations, where including prisoners raises the joblessness rate by only a few tenths of a percentage point. Counting prisoners would raise the official black male unemployment rate, which Western estimates at nearly 39% during the mid 1990s, including prisoners. Western and his colleague Becky Pt. find that when incarceration is factored in, there was no enduring recovery in the employment of young black high school dropouts during the 8-year Clinton employment boom. By artificially reducing both aggregate and racially specific unemployment rates, mass incarceration makes it easier for the majority culture to continue to ignore the urban ghettos that live on beneath official rhetoric about opportunity being generated by free markets. It encourages and enables the new, that is, subtler and more covert racism. Relying heavily on long-standing American opportunity myths and standard class ideology, this new racism blame inner-city minorities for their own failure to match white performance in a supposedly now free, meritorious, and colorblind society. Whites who believe that racial barriers have been lifted in the U.S. think that people of color who do not succeed fall short because of choices they made and or because of inherent cultural or even biological limitations. Let me take a drink here. You know, this isn't bad. Fountain Cola. Okay. Correctional Keynesianism and the new racism. The ultimate policy irony at the heart of America's passion for prisons can be summarized by what I call correctional Keynesianism. Big word. The prison construction boom fed by the rising market of black offenders is a job and tax base creator for predominantly white communities that are generally far removed from urban minority concentrations. Those communities, often recently hollowed out by the deindustrializing and family farm destroying gales of the free market system, have become part of a prison industrial lobby that presses for harsher sentences and tougher laws. seeking to protect and expand their economic base even as crime rates continue to fall. With good reason, the prison building boom serves as what British sociologist David Ladipo calls, quote, a latter day Keynesian infrastructural investment program for often blight struck communities. Indeed, it has been phenomenally successful in terms of creating relatively secure, decent paid, and often unionized jobs. Close quote. According to Todd Clear, the negative labor market effects of mass incarceration on black communities are probably minor compared to the economic relocation of resources from black to white communities that mass incarceration entails. Excuse me. As Clear explains in cool and candid terms, quote, each prisoner represents an economic asset that has been removed from that community and placed elsewhere. As an economic being, the person would spend money at or near his or her area of residence, typically an inner city. Imprisonment displaces that economic activity. Instead of buying snacks in a local deli, the prisoner makes those purchases in a prison commissary. The removal may represent a loss of economic value to the home community, but it is a boon to the prison host community. Each prisoner represents as much as $25,000 in income for the community in which the prison is located, not to mention the value of constructing the prison facility in the first place. This can be a massive transfer of value. A young male worth a few $1,000s of support to children in local purchases is transformed into a $25,000 financial asset to a rural prison community. The economy of the rural community is artificially amplified. The local city economy artificially deflated. Close quote. It's a disturbing picture, even in this cynical age, full of unsettling parallels and living links to chattel slavery. Young black men being involuntarily removed as economic assets from black communities to distant rural destinations where they are kept under lock and key by white majority overseers. It is difficult to imagine a more pathetic denouement to America's long interwoven narratives of class and racial privilege. The rise of correctional Keynesianism is one of the negative and racially charged consequences of technically colorblind political economic processes. An analogy. Historical folklore romanticizes the large number of British and European convicts and ex-convicts who peopled and prospered in colonial North America and Australia. But leaving aside the question of how many of those ex-offenders thrived, much less survived, the transplanted convicts of earlier eras landed anew in largely agricultural societies not yet based on wage and salaried labor, and concentrated private monopoly in the means of production and distribution. It is entirely more difficult for an ex-offender to re-enter the U.S. modern capitalist society in which the preponderant majority of working-age persons must find someone willing to take the risk, make the investment, of hiring them. A more telling and accurate historical analogy in their case, and the racial consistency rightly suggests considerable historical continuities of race and class, is found in the economic and labor market circumstances faced by America's suddenly free former slaves after the Civil War. All black and woefully short on capital, skills, and education, attempting to enter a society that still despised and coerced them. To be sure, it is no simple matter to determine the precise extent to which mass incarceration is simply exacerbating the deep socioeconomic and related cultural and political traumas that already plague inner city communities and help explain disproportionate black criminality, arrest, and incarceration in the first place. Still, it is undeniable that the race to incarcerate is having a profoundly negative effect on black communities. Equally undeniable is the fact that black incarceration rates reflect deep racial bias in the criminal justice system and the broader society. Do the cheerleaders of Get Tough Crime and sentencing policy really believe that African Americans deserve to suffer so disproportionately at the hands of the criminal justice system? There is a vast literature showing that structural, institutional, and cultural racism and severe segregation by race and class are leading causes of inner city crime. Another considerable body of literature shows that blacks are victims of racial bias at every level of the criminal justice system, from stop, frisk, and arrest to prosecution, sentencing, release, and execution. These disparities give legitimacy to the movement of ex offender groups for the expunging of criminal and prison records for many nonviolent offenses, especially in cases where ex convicts have shown an earnest desire to go straight. Deeper remedies are required. These include a moratorium on new prison construction to stop the insidious, self replicating expansion of the prison industrial complex, the repeal of laws that deny voting rights to felons and ex felons, amnesty and release for most prisoners convicted of nonviolent crimes, decriminalization of narcotics, the repeal of the war on drugs at home and abroad, revision of state and federal sentencing and local zero tolerance practices and ordinances, abolition of racial, ethnic, and class profiling in police practice, and the outlawing of private, for profit prisons and other economic activities that derive investment gain from mass incarceration. That was well said. Activists and policymakers should call for a criminal to social justice peace dividend. The large scale transfer of funds spent on mass arrests, surveillance, and incarceration into such policy areas as drug treatment, job training, transitional services for ex offenders, and public education regarding the employment potential of ex offenders. They should call for the diversion of criminal justice resources from crime in the streets, i.e., the harassment and imprisonment of lower class and inner city people, to serious engagement with undersentenced crime in the suites. More broadly, they should seek a general redistribution of resources from privileged and often fantastically wealthy persons to those most penalized from birth by America's long and intertwined history of inherited class and race privilege. America's expanding prison, probation, and parole populations are recruited especially from what leading slavery reparations advocate Randall Robinson calls, quote, the millions of African Americans bottom-mired in urban hells by the savage time release social rehabilitations of American slavery, close quote. The ultimate solutions lie perhaps beyond the parameters of the existing political economic order. Capitalism, Eugene Debs argued in 1920, quote, needs and must have the prison to protect itself from the lower class criminals it has created, close quote. But the examples of Western Europe and Canada, where policymakers prefer prevention and rehabilitation through more social democratic approaches, show that mass incarceration is hardly an inevitable product of capitalism. And nothing can excuse policymakers and activists from the responsibility to end racist criminal justice practices that significantly exacerbate the difficulties faced by the nation's most disadvantaged. More than merely a symptom of the tangled mess of problems that create, sustain, and deepen America's insidious patterns of class and race inequality, mass incarceration has become an essential part of the mess. For these and other reasons, it will be an especially worthy target for creative, democratic protest and policy formation in the new millennium. All right. So that was another chapter of Prison Nation, the warehousing of America's poor. That was part 2, guys. So I hope this is my first time streaming on Instagram, guys. So I hope my audio is good, and I tried to fix the camera. So we've got about, maybe I'm gonna read about see how I got bookmarks in this. I'm gonna read about a dozen. So man, so I didn't know, or I guess I forgot that if you go to prison, they don't count that against unemployment. So they kind of they mess with they're always jacking the statistics on unemployment, you know. Um it's like, but it's such a bullshit number, man. How's the economy doing? Look at the unemployment rates, but it's like how many people have two or three jobs? How many people hate their job? How many people are overworked, underpaid, etc., etc. So, but that was a pretty eye opener there. But again, this was colorblind. This was written in Descent, summer 2001. So yeah, there's a couple dozen, maybe 3 dozen or so articles that are taken from, um, the past 25 years or so. So all right. Well, thank you guys for watching. Um, I'll upload this to YouTube, but man, I haven't posted a YouTube video in like 5 to 6 weeks, man. It's so hard being consistent. I've been going live a lot, but yeah, I just need to do the thumbnails and all that. So sometimes it just feels like homework. All right, guys. Well, thank you for joining the stream, guys, and I do film reviews. I like to play video games, but I'm also anti-capitalist, anti-imperialist. I like to read books on stream that some for fun, video game history, film stuff. But just how horrible capitalism, the U.S. government is, man. So I gotta read. Gotta speak truth to power, guys. Have fun, stay informed. That's kind of the shtick on my channel. So, all right. Well, I'm gonna try and get a film review stream in, but let me jack with my because I'm doing this like vertical stream on Instagram. So, getting my web browser all set up for that sounds messed up, but Lainey, thanks for joining the Instagram stream and commenting. I love your show with Warren. Follow Extra Bulla, The Undercurrent on YouTube. Lainey Peterson. They do great work. You guys do great stuff. So, okay. Well, thanks again, guys. I'm going to try and stream later tonight.